I wanted to share with you a story about a passionate advocacy for Israel, what it means, how it works. So when we speak about Israel, we have the advantage that we mostly know what we're talking about. We've been to Israel, we know what the country is, we know that it's not 150 million people. It's a good starting point, make no mistake. The surprises you see out there when it comes to Israel is quite staggering. So a few years ago, in April of 2016, I was on the phone with a good friend of mine, the Israeli Consul General at the time in San Francisco. And he tells me, Shahar, you know, I'm just having the best of times in Alaska. Oh, that's exciting, I told him. I wish I could go to Alaska someday. Hope you're having fun. He said, no. I had a great tour today at the Jewish Museum in Alaska. I didn't even know there was a Jewish museum in Alaska. I know that there are Jews in Alaska. So what do you have there? Bears with kippah? I mean, how does that work in Alaska? He said, no. The reason I'm telling you this is because the main exhibit in the Jewish Museum in Anchorage, Alaska was dedicated to the operation on Eagle's Wings, which in 1949 brought tens of thousands of Yemenite Jews to Israel. I said, oh, that makes perfect sense. A museum in Anchorage, Alaska is dedicated to the arrival in Israel of Yemenite Jews in 1949. That's perfect. Now, the reason I was bewildered and surprised was not only because I had no idea what he was talking about, but also because my grandparents came to Israel on those planes in 1949. And if I had no idea what he was talking about, you can imagine what, Joe Shlomowicz and Shane Simpson, what would they know? So I asked, how come in Alaska? He said, well, let me tell you this. The planes that brought the Jews on Eagle's Wings were none other than, for $250,000 on this game of Jeopardy, Alaska Airlines. It was Alaska Airlines that was part of this incredible operation that brought the Yemenite Jews to Israel in 1949, and I had no idea. Only I knew there and then, in April of 2016, that I'm going to Anchorage, Alaska. Why was that important? Because it was a fascinating part of history that resonated a value. What was the value here? The return of the Jewish people home, the ingathering of the exiles. This is the message we try to get out there for those who stand up against Israel, continuously say, you are colonialists, you don't belong here. And this was an opportunity to share that story again from a completely fresh, new, and unknown angle. So I reached out, the way some people would, to Alaska Airlines and the Alaska Jewish Museum, cold calling them and saying, hi, my name is Shahar Azani. I'm calling from New York. Yes. And I would love to do something about the ingathering of the exiles of the return of the Yemenite Jews to Israel upon its reestablishment in 1940. Oh, no, wait. We'll give you an email, send us the info, we'll talk. Which I did. And 3 months later, in July of 2016, we had an event in Anchorage, Alaska, co-sponsored by the Jewish Museum, the Jewish community, the mayor, and Alaska Airlines. And the title was Gratitude. Shahar is coming to say thank you for bringing his family home. Now, why was that important? Not because of me, but because we were able to take that principle of the ingathering of the exiles and shift it in a way that makes it a lot more palatable for your target audience. For had we come with our usual hammer and said, Israel is for the Jews, it's our home. It is, and it's all true. But sometimes our target audience might react in a way that's not exactly like, let's sing Hava Nagila together. Maybe they'll go, I understand you have issues, I'll talk to you later. But when you're able to speak to a group of people and start your words by saying something that's maybe not very Israeli, maybe not very common in our field, that's actually saying thank you, toda rabba, we appreciate, you're already on a path of interaction. You've already taken that advocacy for Israel, that desire to say the right thing, connected it to yourself. This was mine. This was mine because my family was part of this, but I was able to use this to echo this greater and grander principle of our very existence as a Zionist re-emerging Jewish state. And one of the things that made me ultra proud was the fact that Alaska Airlines, I was very intrigued to know, what is Alaska Airlines' approach on this? Do they look back and say, we shouldn't have done it? Or are they enthusiastic about that part of their history? And I was so happy to see that not only were they not shunning their past, they were embracing it. Oh, finally someone cared. It's been on our website for ages. We're so happy you reached out. Of course it's a part of our history. So you know how so many of our pro-Israel events are co-sponsored by this temple, that rabbi, this bagel store, that shul. Finally, we have a commercial company rather than just, Mendel and Schmendel bagel. So rarely do we actually get those companies to march into our field, which they feel is too politicized and too risky and a minefield. And here they are. Alaska Airlines is marching so happily and say, yes, this is who we are. And during that trip, we met with the mayor. We started engaging on commercial contacts, bringing Israeli companies to Anchorage. It was a great anchor to move Israel into another realm. But it was also a great opportunity to do something else, because when I was walking through that museum, I met the curator of the museum, whose father was one of the Machal pilots, those volunteers who came and volunteered for Israel to fight in the War of Independence. And on that bookshelf at the museum, there was a book. And the book was called On Eagle's Wings. And I asked Leslie, I said, who's the writer? She said, well, the writer is Captain Elgin Long. Who's Captain Elgin Long? He is the last surviving crew member of Alaska Airlines who was part of that operation. And upon learning the significance of what he did, he decided to put all of his memoirs in writing. He wasn't there at the time, but of course, you know me at this point. I already decided that I'm going to call Captain Elgin Long, and I have to speak to him, which I did. And last year, in September of 2017, Captain Elgin Long traveled to New York. We had a great event with him at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, where we just came together to say thank you. And I was amazed and taken by this man who looks at me and says, Shahar, you're making such a fuss about this. I said, what do you mean a fuss, Elgin? He said, too much noise. I didn't do anything special. I did what anyone would do in such dire straits when people needed help. I said, yeah, of course, Elgin. Of course you would. Of course anybody would. But then I said, you know, Elgin, you did it in 1949. Have you been back in Israel since? So he said, well, actually, no. I said, well, would you like to visit Israel again? He said, well, absolutely. I said, well, any time frame? He said, well, look at me, I'm 91, any minute from now. Feel free. So last month, at the beginning of March, I had the pleasure of accompanying Captain Elgin Long on his long-awaited return to Israel on an 8-day tour, when before coming to Israel, Captain Long told me that the thing he wants to see the most is to see the people that he brought from Yemen on those planes. He wanted to see, as he told me, how are they today? What have they done with their lives? I want to meet their children. I want to see the country that I helped witness its recreation. And to him, as someone who was half Irish, half Scottish, had got nothing to do with the Jewish people, to come forth and say, it was my pleasure and privilege to be at the epicenter of the ingathering of the exiles and the fulfillment of the biblical prophecy of the Jews returning home, resonates higher, deeper, in a much more profound manner than anything we as the organized Jewish community might say. Elgin is a well-known aviator whose expertise is in his field in finding the remains of Amelia Earhart's plane. This is what he dedicated his life for. When he realized what he did and what it had meant for us as the Jewish people in the state of Israel, it changed the way he thought of the entire operation. You know, and just to see him in Israel, hugging two 96-year-old sisters who came to him and gave him a kiss on the forehead and said, thank you for giving us life. For out of the 50,000 people who came in the course of those 3 years of the operation, an incredible community of 750,000 people was given life. And Israel was established because of the passion of people like you. And you should have seen this 92-year-old man standing there all blushing as the people are pouring onto him like a human tsunami, giving him the hugs and kisses, and he keeps on welcoming it and saying, this is what I lived for, this is what I wanted to see. What is your best memory, Elgin? I asked him. He said, well, you know, when we first arrived in Israel, it was during the War of Independence, and there was no radio communication. We didn't even know that it was Tel Aviv, or the way he called it, Lida Airport. Lida in Arabic, Lod, before it was named the Ben Gurion. And we took a chance. We landed there in this dark airfield. And as we came to a halt, an army car was making its way towards us, and we had no idea of really knowing that this is the Israel Defense Forces. So we opened the window and we waved and we said, we have Jewish refugees on board. So then we realized it was the Israel Defense Forces. They came on board, they took everyone out, and just before they left, one of the officers looked back and said, well, just know this, it is a good thing that you've done. And Elgin, when sitting with the president and the prime minister and the speaker of the Knesset, looked up and said, you know, being here now in Israel today, I only now realize just how much of a good thing it was that we have done in bringing those refugees to Israel. And to spend that time with him when he was walking through the airport, you know, we're here, many members of the younger generation, people who have no idea what it's like to live without in Israel and will never know what it's like to live without Israel, but take it for granted, this realization, this miracle, this unbelievable existence of Israel, regardless of all of the political struggles and disagreements which we're so excellent in as a Jewish people. But when he walked through the airport, he said, you know, when I came here to Lida Airport, there was one plane coming in and out. Today, Lida has become Ben Gurion International Airport that welcomed millions and millions of people. And he pointed in the terminal, the arrival hall, there is a picture of the old terminal building, the way it used to be in the days. And being next to him as he pointed, says, that's it, that's it. This is exactly it. That's what it looked like in my time. The story of Elgin meant a lot here, but meant also a lot back home in Israel. For we in Israel needed that realization, that moment to rise above our usual political discourse and just realize what it is that we are part of. That in spite of all of the difficulties, this was a miraculous realization of a dream. You know, when Elgin told me, how did the flights even come about? They received a telegram to fly to Aden in the southern tip of Yemen. They had no idea why, but the British command there was noticing hordes of Jewish refugees fleeing through the desert in the cold of night and the heat of day, making their way to the gates of the British army base, saying, we need rescue, but there was no facility on the ground to help them, and people were dying on the way from diseases, from bandits. And when they arrived there in that small plane of Alaska Airlines, they had about 48 seats on the plane, and they had to make a decision of what to do. So the Iron Men came together, this is what the team was called, and said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to take out the seats. And we're going to make sure to fit in the plane, not only 48 people, but 150 people. And that's what they did. And continuously flying in and out for 9 hours between Aden and Tel Aviv. They brought thousands of people that way. By the way, that was the reason, upon returning to the US, Elgin lost his job because he was in breach of FAA regulations with regards to safety and security on the plane. He took a risk, and he knew why he was taking it, and he was proud of taking that risk. Another touching moment in that trip was when Elgin visited his good friend, Wayne Peak, who was also a pilot, a Machal pilot during the War of Independence, and decided, after fighting for Israel, went ahead and lived his life. And when his time came at the end of the 70s, he asked to be buried in Israel, the country that he loved so much and was connected to, in what to him was the Battle of Britain, the War of Independence. And he was buried in the military cemetery at the slopes of Mount Carmel in Haifa. And Elgin, one of his most important goals of the trip was to go and say hi to his good friend Wayne Peak, whom, rumor has it, I'm just putting it out there, he was not Jewish, but to facilitate his arrival, you know, the Machal pilots were very close to heart to Ezer Weizmann, our former president of blessed memory, and for some reason the Wayne became Wayne Weitzman Peak. I'm just saying, sometimes when there are bureaucracies. And when Elgin came before the grave, you know, that was such a moment on that Friday noon when he looked down and said, Wayne, it's good to see you again. We've flown together in the past and soon we will fly again. But our union is right here in the land of Israel, which both of us so very much love. So when you take a moment to understand that the story of Israel is not an ordinary tale. It's one that must be told through the prism of you. And that's what we tell our kids. Who are you? And what do you love? What triggers you when it comes to Israel? What are you passionate about? And you know, one of the things that the person who you're going to hear right after me is the incredible Sivan Yaari. Sivan Yaari is the founder of Innovation Africa, an unbelievable organization that the work it does resonates to a large degree, especially with our younger audiences. The ability to harness Israeli technology to help African villages. Solar, water, the coming of progress into a place that direly needs it. Binds the technological progress, which is a point we always harness in our talk, Startup Nation, but to the soul. It's not only about the red alert, our ability to intercept missiles. It's our ability to bind those good technological advantages to good deeds around us. How are we using our technology to make the world a better place? What are we doing to make sure that Israel's light shines high and deep? These are the messages that we spread around. This is what resonates with many people. And yes, they might start their engagement on Israel with the geopolitics because this is what they hear all the time. This is what I heard all the time when I was a diplomat. And just before I started my posting, when I served at the Israeli embassy in Nairobi, Kenya, I was also very much into the geopolitics. I knew the talking points. I learned everything I could about the Israeli-Arab conflict, the Palestinians, the points, Oslo, the peace process. I was ready. And then my life changed in a taxi cab. When the first conversation I had with a taxi driver in Nairobi, when he asked me, "Where are you from?" And you know, at that point, security tells us, don't tell them where you're from, you never know. It's Africa, you might end up in a trunk and then in Dubai. Just be quiet. So of course, when the taxi driver asked me, where are you from? What do I say? Israel. But I'm ready. I was ready for this boxing match. He's going to say Israel, and then he's going to shout at me because of the Palestinians, and I'm going to win over him, and then I'll throw a Bible at him, and I'll leave the car. So then he looks at me and says, wow, Israel, thank you. Now, as an Israeli, hearing the word thank you is amazing, right? It's really a moment of deep elation. Toda rabah, thank you. I took a moment to just breathe it in. Thank you, he said. Thank you for what? I've only been here for 5 minutes. He said, thank you because my father was one of the first trainees who came to Israel after Kenya gained its independence, and they studied water conservation together. And because of that knowledge, my family and the surrounding villages were able to cope through the dry season in Kenya. It was that moment that I realized that there is so much more to Israel than what I know. That there is so much more to Israel than what so many of us know. It's not only one-dimensional existence, as if Israel is nothing more and nothing less but a counter-reaction to the existence of a Palestinian narrative, which you might gather if you only follow the current news. It's a much deeper understanding of a people returning home, regaining their place on world stage, and reimagining a state that is a true beacon of light and goodness unto so much and so many. And not only when it comes to the region itself, but far beyond it. You know, in one of my conversations with an Israeli expert who came to Zambia to run a new program, he asked me, he said, Shahar, how come I'm able to travel 12 hours here to this remote part of Zambia and do this work, whereas I can't drive 45 minutes and do it in Ramallah, back home in Israel? Can you imagine the frustration? And in spite of that frustration, we know who we are. And this is what we try to share out there. To tell the story of Israel in a way that will resonate with many and will touch hearts, but we know it's only a beginning. Because we're going to reach the tough questions, and it's okay to reach the tough questions, and it's okay to ask the tough questions. But we must reach that point when we are equipped with the knowledge and understanding of what Israel really is. A couple of years ago, we had an idea. I don't know if any of you visited the Shrine of Philosophy and Human Love and Life called the United Nations. And inside that building, there is one specific chamber. It's called the Security Council that is a significant life changer that helps so many people around the world. And outside of those chambers of the Security Council, there is a permanent exhibit dedicated to the Palestinian issue. And anyone and everyone who comes to the UN on the organized tours, you pay $10, you get propaganda, you can go through there and they'll take you through that exhibit to tell you about the stealing of Palestine and the Palestinian narrative. So at Stand With Us, we had a revolutionary idea a couple of years ago. We thought of reaching out to Dani Danon and the Israeli mission and together to speak to the UN Public Affairs Department and say, how about if we put up an exhibit called the Israel Matters Display, which are 14 panels we have telling the story of Israel, from the geopolitics to culture to agriculture to food to history to Zionism. So it took us about 6 months. And after 6 months, they said, you know what? Beseder. Okay, you got it. Stop calling us every day. Okay. So what did we get? They said, you have 2 weeks to show your Israel Matters display. Okay, but just to make sure you have to schlep twice, we're going to give you 1 week in April, 1 week in May. Okay, we'll take it. So we took it, and I'll never forget, 2 days before we were about to set up the exhibit, the chief of staff of the UN mission calls me and says, Shahar, we have an issue. I said, what's the issue? Said, well, the UN got back to me and said there is a problem with some of your panels of the exhibit. They do not commensurate, so they said, with UN values. I said, oh, okay, well, which ones? Said, well, they didn't like the one talking about Jerusalem. And then there was another issue, you know that word, Zionism. They felt that it's not befitting to put the word Zionism in the UN. So I said, you know what, just do me a favor, call the guy at the Public Affairs Department and say, Shahar Azani says, thank you. And then I sat down and we together wrote a press release calling the UN negates once more the Jewish right of self-determination, aka Zionism, and whoosh, start a storm. And you know you hit the storm when Chuck Schumer, 6 hours later, goes like, Israel matters to me. And Israeli media and Jewish media and general media, and by the time, that was Saturday night, 11 p.m., by Sunday, 8 p.m., we got a call from the UN saying, you know, there might be a bit of miscommunication there. It's just a misunderstanding. And we were able to put it all there, but there was a bigger, graver problem here, because the problem that we've seen was that the word Zionism has been taken over. Instead of us being able to claim our identity, and it wasn't a decision made by the thinking heads, as if they are at the UN, but, you know, some of the clerks, the lower level, who just go over the paperwork and say, that sounds right, that's not, that's public nudity, that's not here. And they felt that Zionism was in that category. And that's a bigger risk, because it means that we've lost control of our narrative. If people think that Zionism is a crude word, rather than the manifestation of our right for our own home. So in our view, let Elgin tell them what Zionism is. And let other people who interacted with Israel's goodness, from some of the members you saw before to leading people today, when Israel is holding a biannual summit of African women leaders every other year at the Golda Meir Mount Carmel Training Center, which rarely people hear of, that Israel is responsible and was dealing with those issues long before they were Nobel Peace Prize materials for all sorts of liberal magazines. When Golda Meir dove into those issues in the mid-50s, this is downright inspiration. And I'll end with a story. So my dear friend here, Mona, brought me to speak with the Westchester Jewish Council at one of the colleges here, the Westchester Community College. And I'll never forget, she said, you know, Shahar, they want you to come and speak at the School of Humanities, but they don't do the whole Hasbara thing. So we just, you know, they have this book club, and you have to choose a book and think how you can go about this. So yeah, just choose a book. So of course I said, why not? You know, if Mona asks, I do. And I took with me the Harry Potter. No, I'm just kidding. I decided I'm going to read them a part of my favorite book, which was My Life by Golda Meir. And the story that tells about her outreach to some of the African leaders back in the mid-50s, before she established Mashav, Israel Center for International Cooperation. And ever since, we've been back, what, 1 more year and 1 more year and 1 more year, because we didn't come and spoke from our own ethnocentric existence, but we spoke of something that had a universal meaning and impact for all of them. For these kids who were not Jewish, who had nothing to do with Israel, but they were inspired to hear of a woman leader who made a significant strategic outreach on the field of diplomacy that still resonates decades after she's gone. And that in itself holds a universal meaning, and that's the key for ambassadizing Israel, to be able to bind not only the mind, but also the heart. For this is the only antidote we will have against the ignorance that is the foundation for the success of the anti-Semitic campaigns. For if I don't know anything about you, it's easy for me to think that you are evil and nasty. In one of the, and that I promise, final story. In one of the instances when talk about misconceptions about Israelis, I remember coming from Canada into the US, and I was filling the forms, and when I presented them, the lady looks at me and says, tells their friend, I lost the bet. Now, like, what bet did you have? I'm just wondering. She said, you know, we have a game here, filling the forms, we're wondering where you're from. So let's just say we didn't necessarily think Israel. I said, well, what did you think? Spain, maybe Brazil, maybe Italy. Israel didn't come to mind. I said, why not? I said, oh, because you smile too much. So when you talk about misconceptions, they run as deep and as ignorant as you can imagine. So in short, the message that we keep on telling our kids and everyone else is when you speak of Israel, you speak from here. Be who you are and ambassadorize that incredible miracle that we are fortunate enough to be alive in such an incredible time for the Jewish people and for the state of Israel. So thank you very much for giving me the time today. Thank you.